I am Coach Jay, intrapersonal relationship coach and trauma practitioner, betrayal trauma practitioner. I'd like to start my class with a funny or corny dad joke, as I always do. And today's is this: if you're ready, get ready to chuckle. My daughter asked me if I seen the dog bowl. I said, no, I didn't even know he could. But okay. If you can take two deep healing breaths with me, in through the nose, out through the mouth. If you prefer your eyes closed, wonderful, or open. Breathe in all that nice healing oxygen and breathe out all the negativity. All right. What is betrayal trauma? Betrayal trauma describes the emotional impact a person experiences after their trust or well-being is violated by a significant person in their life. We could be bamboozled by people, if the cashier is supposed to give us 75 cents back and she gives us 25 cents back, that's one thing. But when we trust somebody and then we're bamboozled, that's what causes betrayal trauma. It's somebody that we are dependent on, that we rely on, that we completely trust, and we find out that there was a betrayal, a break of that trust. This type of trauma usually relates to primary attachment figures like a parent, a caregiver, or other important relationships from childhood. And certainly in adulthood, it could be from a priest, a pastor, and most certainly romantic partners or significant other. This class will explore some of the causes, symptoms, and impacts of betrayal trauma, as well as some of the coping mechanisms that may be helpful. So the betrayal trauma theory was actually proposed in 1991 by Jennifer Freed, I think. She was a PhD. She was a psychologist, a researcher, and an author. And according to her theory, someone may experience betrayal trauma when, A, they are terrified, sometimes for their physical safety or their life. So, somebody held at gunpoint, somebody abused sexually. And or they were betrayed by someone who they depend on for survival. Again, this is somebody you rely on, somebody you depend on. This could be a caregiver, it could be a child, could be your boss. This is somebody who gives you food, water, shelter, and other basic needs, even physical protection. So, if your spouse is there giving you physical protection, you're relying on them to give you physical protection. They step out of the relationship. That's betrayal trauma. You can also rely on somebody just for love. I mean, when you're in a relationship, there's written and unwritten rules. When you love somebody, you trust them, you say, listen, I have your back, I hope you have mine. And when somebody goes out of the relationship, they don't have your back, or at least that you don't feel like they do. The theory lists experiences like physical, sexual, or sadistic abuse by a caregiver or primary attachment as examples of traumatic betrayals. The betrayal can cause post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, particularly if the incident caused a lot of fear. And most certainly, infidelity brings on a tremendous amount of fear. I just want to give a quick side note. People with PTSD often do their best not to think about the trauma. Yes, people with PTSD, they don't want to think of the trauma. People with betrayal trauma, however, do go over it constantly in their mind, which is why when people that have both PTSD and betrayal trauma, there's this additional internal war of, I don't want to think about it. Yes, I do. I need to think about it. It's not helpful. It's an additional internal war. The theory notes that from the individual may look likely to block the abuse if the betrayal from their mind. I'm very sorry. Let me start again. And this is why I stayed in my notes, because my ADHD has me going off. And if I go off on a tangent, I'll waste your time. The theory notes that the individual may be more likely to block the abuse or betrayal from their mind and develop dissociative amnesia if they're dependent on the betrayer for their daily needs and survival. What does that mean in layman terms? Basically, if your parent was abusive, you might kind of like separate their abuse or kind of dismiss it or downplay it because they do give you food or something like that. Our brain can essentially ignore the betrayal in order to maintain the relationship with our caregiver to survive, which is basically what I just said, which is why self-forgiveness is needed after some of the dust settles. We do have to forgive ourselves for staying in a position that maybe wasn't optimal or healthy, but that's because we got other benefits from them, other benefits that we needed to survive. What makes betrayal trauma so painful is that the person who is betrayed often cannot simply sever their relationship with the offender. This creates a complex relationship with primary attachment figures who are simultaneously providing harm and support. So again, it's that duality of, you're feeding me, you're giving me a safe place to rest, but you're also being physically abusive with me, or whatever the case may be. If the trauma was caused by a parent, then often these children may grow up to be adults who end up in relationships with partners who violate their needs in familiar ways. Which is why I say be very careful. Sometimes when you get into a relationship and you're like, oh my God, this person feels like a family member. I feel like I've known them forever. It's so familiar. Well, if your childhood was abusive, familiar isn't that necessarily healthy. So be careful. In order to reconcile the two opposites of people who provide harm and care, they tend to avoid processing damaging behavior, normalizing unhealthy behaviors. They fabricate fantasies to compensate for painful memories, and they also even blame themselves. So at the core, people who have experienced betrayal trauma tend to dissociate from the trauma, and in turn, they struggle with the consequences of extreme dissociation of their emotions, which is why sometimes, like, you can be in a healthy marriage with somebody and secretly they're cutting. And you're like, well, what's going on? Like, I thought we had a happy, healthy relationship, and you're secretly cutting or secretly looking at porn or secretly hooking up. It's because one aspect of them is dissociating and dealing with the trauma, while the other part of them, the part that they're presenting to yourself, is that happy, healthy person, even though technically they're not happy and healthy, or else they wouldn't be doing what they're doing on the side. Anyways, they struggle with the consequences of extreme dissociation of their emotions, feelings, and reactions to the trauma. It's common for people to self-medicate with substances, food, relationships, sex, or other forms of distraction. I basically just said this, because oftentimes when we're with people who betray, or if we're the betrayer ourselves, we're doing it because we want to numb something, we want to distract, we want to avoid, we need a fantasy, we need to cope. Injured, happy, healthy people don't stray. We're trying to avoid something, trying to numb something. Unfortunately, we shouldn't look at people who we betrayed. Like, for instance, if I'm gonna step out of my marriage and try to have an affair, that person is not necessarily a human being. They're a big walking pain medication. That's why I'm with them, because they're easing my pain for something, which helps people that were betrayed on. So don't compare yourself to somebody because you're comparing yourself to a pain medication. Makes no sense. Anyways, betrayal trauma can have severe impact on the person and cause them to experience symptoms of health-related conditions such as PTSD, depression, anxiety, dissociation, difficulty concentrating, emotional dysregulation, trust in a relationship. And trust is huge, because listen, if you don't trust yourself, there's no way you can trust other people around you. And that's often the case with people that are betrayed. Now they don't even trust themselves, their gut instinct, and so forth. So how are they going to give that trust to somebody else? There's physical pain, gastrointestinal pain. I can't tell you how many times people tell me they have problems with their whole digestion after betrayal. There's substance abuse, obviously, eating disorders. Some people lose 75 pounds after D-Day. Some people gain 75 pounds. People handle betrayal differently. Betrayal trauma could also look like physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. I mean, people that are traumatized in their past, they could become abusive, even sexually. I mean, you would think, geez, you were sexually abused. Why in the world would you want to sexually abuse other people? Well, that's sometimes the outcome of it, unfortunately. Or you were screamed at all of your childhood. Why do you scream at your kids? There's such thing as abusive cycle, unfortunately. Infidelity. Trauma could look like infidelity. Trauma could look like financial problems. I mean, if somebody's insides are so chaotic, they might not have the best financial system. I mean, their finances are going to be in chaos. Their spiritual, mental, emotional, psychological outward appearance might be in complete disarray. And they have oftentimes ulterior motives or secret behaviors, especially if when you were a child, the only way your parents gave you any good attention or affirmation is if you brought your best self to them. That's what you're going to do. That you could do that in your marriage. I'm only going to show my spouse my best side, All the other sides to me, I have to be secret and hide. And those secrecy, they grow, they fester, and they oftentimes lead into other things like betrayals. So if you've experienced betrayal trauma, here are some steps that can help you cope. Acknowledge the betrayal. The first step is acknowledging how you were betrayed and hurt. Be honest with yourself and consider the impact of the betrayal on the relationship in your life. And I tell people all the time, radical acceptance. Listen, when we are betrayed, oftentimes what happened is that picture perfect image we had of somebody in our head is destroyed. We put somebody on an unnecessary pedestal, or we put somebody in an unnecessary puzzle piece in that puzzle of where they belong in our life. And now their behavior showed us they never belonged there in the first place. Or if they did, radical acceptance with, okay, this is who they are, this is where they are, and they did A, B, and C. So radical acceptance is key. Write down your feelings in a journal. You may find relief through writing down your feelings in a journal. It can help you identify the emotions you're experiencing and create a space to reflect on them instead of suppressing and avoiding them. I always say we always got all this tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of emotions and thoughts and feelings up here. We got to get them down on paper. Journaling is very helpful. Process your emotions. You got to feel it to heal it. Simply put, confronting the trauma you experienced in the past can bring up a lot of emotions, including grief, fear, anger, regret, loss, anxiety. It's important to process these emotions so you can start healing. Walking through a fire is not fun and it doesn't feel good. But if you want to shed your old skin and come out in your new skin, your new post-betrayal skin, you got to walk through the fire. And walking through the fire doesn't feel good. Seek support or treatment, whether it's talking to friends, relatives, a pastor, coach, counselor, whatever, preferably they're trauma informed. Do that. Now you got to be careful because once you tell somebody something, you can't retract that, such as friends or family. Because if you decide to reconcile or rebuild or what have you, now you got to hear, are you stupid or are you weak or are you this? So, it's helpful to seek support by talking with a friend or a professional. People who have experienced betrayal trauma often feel like they can only rely on themselves and tend to isolate themselves. So it's healthy to talk to people. But again, just be very careful who you talk to. Keeping in mind, friends, family, and people that are not trauma informed often have the greatest intentions, just not the best words. All right, set boundaries. If the person who betrayed you is still in your life in some capacity, set firm boundaries in your relationship with them to protect your physical, emotional, and mental well-being. Now, if they are not in your life, you have to set your own boundaries. Like, okay, I'm only going to think of them for 5 minutes, or I'm only going to pretend talk to them because, you talk to people who died or talk to people who live a country away. You pretend talk to them for 5 minutes, and then that's it. So, if they're in your life, boundaries on the relationship. If they're not in your life, boundaries on your own mindset. And recognize patterns. If you have recognized betrayal trauma in the past, it's important to recognize whether it's affecting your relationships of the present. Keeping in mind the healing tips and techniques and tactics that you use to heal from trauma, if you don't get rid of those and address those, they eventually morph and evolve into your personality. And then what happens is we take our personality into current relationships or our future, and that's not who we are. That's who we've become based on our past experiences. So be very careful not to use some of the techniques, tactics, and methods of what we needed to heal to live with those for the rest of our life. We needed those to heal. We don't need them anymore. So make sure you address them and get rid of them so they don't affect future relationships. Being abused or betrayed by someone you're close to or someone you depend on can be devastating. It ravishes mind, body, and soul and everything around us. There's no doubt about that. It can affect all your subsequent relationships and take a toll on your mental and physical health. And it does. It's important to address the betrayal you faced and process it and take steps towards healing and self-care. Keeping in mind, everybody's self-care is different. That rose-scented candle that helps you feel calm makes the next person who might have been molested in their childhood smelling roses feel anxious. So self-care has to be individual. Anyways, a great place to start with healing is congratulations, what you're already doing, and that's watching this class. So I hope you got something out of today's class. Never forget the power of a smile, and God bless you.